Do you love rugby? Come join my Scrum Masters Elite _UK. Explore strategies and share top-level tactical analysis. Subscribe to stay updated with new videos.
The prospect of Robertson coming to England amid the instability of New Zealand rugby. The fate of Scott Robertson. And the quiet movements of power, time, and culture. My first feeling was not anger, nor exactly regret, but a very particular kind of emptiness, the kind that appears when an icon once considered immutable suddenly begins to waver. Rugby New Zealand, and more specifically the All Blacks, in the minds of many people, myself included, is not merely a sports team. It is a benchmark, a frame of reference for stability, identity, discipline, and victory. Therefore, when that stability cracks, the feeling is not simply one of losing a match or making a personnel mistake, but rather like witnessing a culture questioning itself. 1. Is it too early to think about that scenario? A seemingly simple question, yet one that feels deeply philosophical to me. It is not merely a question about Scott Robertson's tenure, but about the tolerance threshold of a system accustomed to winning, about whether a collective that once dominated the world still has the patience to accept a transitional process. 2 years, numerically, may seem short, but in the elite rugby world of New Zealand, 2 years is not an experiment, it is long enough for cracks to surface. What troubles me is not the possibility of Robertson being dismissed, but that he would be dismissed in a context where he was never truly given full authority to build his own system. The comparison with Graham Henry after the shock of 2007 is entirely reasonable. Back then, the New Zealand Rugby Union chose patience and trust, and the reward was a historic period of dominance. But the context today is different. Global rugby has changed. South Africa, France, Ireland, even England, are no longer the chasers. New Zealand no longer holds a monopoly on philosophy, physicality, or tactical thinking. The real question is this: is New Zealand willing to accept that it needs time to redefine itself? Or does it still believe that winning must be the default state?
2. Scott Robertson, a victim of expectations, or an unwilling architect of collapse. I do not see Scott Robertson as a complete victim, but he is certainly not a simple failure. The image of Robertson with the All Blacks is vastly different from Robertson at the Crusaders. At the Crusaders, he was the embodiment of confidence, of a clear identity, of a collective functioning like a precisely programmed machine. With the All Blacks, he appears lost, tense, and, perhaps, lonely. What makes me think the most is his decision to appoint himself as a culture coach. It is a decision that is both admirable and worrying. Admirable because Robertson clearly understands that the problem lies not only in tactics or personnel, but in a cultural rupture after the golden generation departed. Worrying because culture is not something that can be imposed top-down, nor something a single individual, no matter how talented, can simply play a role in creating. Compared to Rassie Erasmus, the difference lies here. Erasmus was fully backed by the system, whereas Robertson was not. Erasmus built Springbok culture as part of a power structure in which players trusted the system and were given a voice. Robertson seems to be trying to patch up a fractured culture while lacking full consensus from both leadership and players. I ask myself, was Robertson too stubborn? Possibly. Did he underestimate the importance of listening to feedback? Also possible. But one thing I am certain of is this: he was never given enough space to fail in a meaningful way. 3. The departure of the old generation. The void is not just about skill. The list of names no longer present, Sam Whitelock, Sam Cane, Aaron Smith, Richie Mo'unga, Brodie Retallick, is not merely a list of players. They are spiritual pillars. When they left, the All Blacks did not just lose skills, they lost an invisible presence, something that made opponents wary and teammates feel secure. I felt this very clearly in the losses to South Africa and England. Those were not defeats caused purely by inferior tactics, but losses rooted in being overpowered in spirit and belief. When South Africa won 43-10 in Wellington, I did not see an All Blacks team that was merely losing. but one that no longer knew who it was. And the most frightening thing for a team like the All Blacks is not losing matches, but losing its sense of identity. 4. New Zealand versus South Africa, a story of systems, not just coaches. One of the sharpest points is the comparison between New Zealand and South Africa. In the 2 years after the World Cup, the biggest difference has not been the players, but the systems of development and cultural succession. South Africa seems to have learned how to accept cycles. They know who is leaving, who will inherit, and they prepare for it early. New Zealand, by contrast, feels like someone so accustomed to winning that they are unfamiliar with rebuilding from scratch. The union's rejection of the Ghetto law that Robertson proposed reflects a very old New Zealand mindset: trust in the domestic system, trust in the traditional pathway. But in a rugby world that has become deeply globalized, is that conservatism still a strength, or has it become an obstacle? 5. The dismissal decision: courage or panic. I do not believe the decision to dismiss Robertson is entirely wrong. But I question the motivation behind it. It feels like a decision driven by power rather than long-term strategy. A 74% win rate, placed in almost any other context, would be considered respectable. But in New Zealand, that number appears to be deemed not enough. This makes me think deeply about the dark side of greatness. When standards are set too high, people are no longer allowed to learn from their mistakes. 6. England and Europe: the different stage, a different opportunity. The prospect of Robertson going to England, whether at Quins or further still at Twickenham, fills me with both curiosity and regret. Perhaps the English environment, inconsistent yet rich in potential, is better suited to a coach who favors long-term construction. English rugby is developing, but also struggling to understand itself, much like New Zealand in some ways. Perhaps it is precisely within that imperfection that Robertson might rediscover the space to experiment, to fail and to grow. 7. Final reflections: not just about rugby. In the end, what lingers with me is not only a rugby story. It is a story about time, trust, and patience in the management of people. In a world increasingly obsessed with immediate results, granting time to a process has become a rare act of courage. Scott Robertson may have been wrong. New Zealand rugby may also have been wrong. But the saddest outcome would be if neither learned anything from this parting. Because sometimes, what is truly too early is not dismissing a coach, but abandoning faith in one's own capacity for renewal.
Thank you for watching my Scrum Masters Elite_UK. Let's explore more rugby tactics together in the upcoming videos. Hit subscribe to stay updated with the latest videos.